Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government and political correspondent, and today I have a guest. You may recognize her from the last election cycle, Sarah Yacoub. Sarah is running for the 30th Assembly District on the Democratic Party, and this is your second time doing so. So Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, now because we don't want to necessarily refer people to the YouTube channel that we did the last interview roughly 2 years ago, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. My husband and I reside here in Hudson. He's a biomedical physicist at the University of Minnesota. I am an attorney. I do pro bono work for trauma survivors as part of a nonprofit. So that's everything from law enforcement to veterans to sexual assault and domestic violence survivors. Before that, I was a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles for 6 years. I interned for the office prior to that, clerked for them as well. We have 7 children between us. My husband brought 3, I brought 2, we made 2. The factory is closed. We finally figured out where those kids come from. So half the time we are the Brady Bunch, half the time we are normal, 2 kids and 2 dogs. We send our kids to public schools. We're very invested in the public school system. Wisconsin, under Governor Evers, has gone from somewhere in the middle of the pack to really leading the nation in public schools. So that's really nice to see, and just want to contribute to that forward growth.
Okay. So you have experience in the legal profession, so I think that tends to help when it comes to writing laws and acting on, debating laws. So, but I have to ask the question right out of the bat: why run again after you lost the last election to the incumbent Shannon Zimmerman?
Sure.
So it was less than a 10 percentage point split, but why do this again?
Sure. Great question. The short answer is I'm masochistic enough to do it, but the more serious, less tongue-in-cheek answer is I feel a responsibility to make use of my experience. As a pro bono attorney in the community, I have a front row seat to a lot of the barriers to wellness and prosperity, and our statutes are lacking. You can tell we don't have very many attorneys in the legislature. And even though we pay them to work full time, if you look at the legislative calendar that's dictated by the party in control, over the last 10 years, they put in maybe 10 to 15% of the work. And so our statutes are badly neglected. What that means is our legal system does not protect those who rely on the legal system for their safety, for that of their children, for rational outcomes, for justice. And it's created a Wild West type effect within our justice system. So from a professional level, I would like the opportunity to legislate and give our statutes the attention that they really deserve to better serve the people. But I wasn't going to run for office. I wasn't going to run again, certainly not in this election cycle. 2020 was very hard on my family. Shannon made fake booking photos of me and circulated them on television. The party and his financial, I call them puppeteers, but the people who financially back him spent something like $1 million spreading some really ugly lies about me in the community. They couldn't run on his record, so they needed people to hate me. And if it were just me, I'm a spectrum kid of sorts, so stuff rolls off my back. I go, oh, that was unpleasant. Moving on. But it was hard on my husband. It was hard on my family, our kids. They're getting older. So I didn't want to put them through something like that again. When it came down to the wire, and with the maps being gerrymandered the way they were, there was no one else who would run against him. And that makes a lot of sense because the maps are so gerrymandered, because Shannon and his party are so nasty to anyone who's a threat to beat him. Why put your name out there? Why put your professional career on the line if you know you're going to lose? And, what happens is we have plenty of wonderful candidates who would be great in the position, but as a function of rational thought, decide not to do it. Because we ran such a strong campaign in 2020, because we had the voter contacts, because we had the voter turnout, we laid the foundation to not only win this election cycle, but to really contribute to the top of the ticket, to make sure Ron Johnson is out, to make sure that we keep Governor Evers in office. So when it came down to the wire, no one else was going to run against him. Someone finally said, another representative said, look, Sarah, if you don't run, he's going to be handed his fourth term. Given his extreme position on the 1849 law, for example, and the reversal of Roe v. Wade, it was enough to have a very serious conversation with my husband and to decide, okay, we're going to do this, come what may of the outcome, but we're going to work on raising awareness, turning out the vote, and letting people have a voice in Wisconsin moving forward.
Now, you mentioned the term gerrymandered. That's redistricting of lines, and it's been done in Wisconsin more on a partisan basis and upheld as such by our Supreme Court after the U.S. Supreme Court didn't want to rule on that. So how has 30th Assembly District changed since the last time you ran in 2020?
Well, River Falls, in response to Shannon losing River Falls, this is my conjecture, throwing darts in the dark, instead of the 30th containing the entire city and town of River Falls, it's now cut in half. That makes it harder to organize, that makes it harder for, what happens is you have one city sort of between two political parties, and that facilitates it falling through the cracks. It's a way to neutralize the votes of River Falls. The idea is that if you have too many chefs in the kitchen, you won't get that same voter turnout, or so is the theory. So instead of having the rest of River Falls, the Republicans drew Shannon into the 30th Assembly District. It's not a well-kept secret that he lives in his Clifton winery. He uses his son's twin home as the address from which he votes and represents the 30th. Yes, that's voter and election fraud. But until it's policed and prosecuted, it's just sort of an embarrassment on our community that he doesn't have the honor to have the integrity to vote and represent where he lives. But should he win this election cycle, he will not have to keep committing voter and election fraud to do what he's doing.
Well, so town of Clifton was added to the 30th.
Correct.
Half the city of River Falls was taken out.
Yes.
And there's also a few townships along I-94 that were added.
They were part of the 30th in 2020, and I have to go back and look at a map because they drew the lines in such a funny way. We used to be in upside down Utah, and now we're sort of a convoluted shape that goes up into Somerset.
But the whole city of Hudson and its surrounding, and North Hudson Village and the surrounding townships are in the 30th.
Correct.
Okay. And so I guess let's get into the issues. And you mentioned the 1849 law. So I was going to ask you, are the issues that you ran on in 2020 the same as 2022? And I suspect they are, but maybe the priorities have changed a little bit.
So yes and no. When I ran in 2020, water and conservation were really central to my campaign. Water is life. You want your kids to be able to play in the sprinklers without worrying they're going to come back with cancer. But because of the psychology of politics, cognitive dissonance, all these different dynamics, folks, for a hodgepodge of reasons, aren't willing to get to a place where they accept that their representative is actually a danger to their public water. And I, as a single candidate for a state legislative position, am not going to convince them that Tom Tiffany is horrendous for clean water or Shannon Zimmerman is anti-conservation, even though conservation groups within the state endorsed me in 2020, they've endorsed me again in 2022. He has a horrible score with them because he is very bad for conservation, but he sends out mailers and smiling pictures that suggest otherwise, and people believe what feels good to believe. And so, to answer your question, I have sort of shifted, but not just as a function of practicality, but of the reality of the time we're living in. So one of the reasons I ultimately decided to run was because of this 1849 law that we have active on the books in Wisconsin right now. And it criminalizes abortion, and it limits, or defines rather, health care and a number of other scenarios in a way that has severe unintended consequences and severe intended consequences. And this is something that my opponent supports, and in a way that was really shocking to me. He's always sold himself as a moderate. I had reason to believe that wasn't necessarily true, but that's, based on private conversations. This is the first time that he's really been public about such an extreme position that's such a detriment, not only to our healthcare, but to families, to freedom, to liberty, and our economy. The regressive effect of having an 1849 law criminalizing abortion, our medical schools are at risk for losing decertification because they can't properly train their medical students. We have a poll that recently happened nationwide, and something like 30% of young women said they wouldn't go to college in a place where they couldn't access health care. And what young woman going to college wants to have her rapist baby? And if we're being honest, sexual assault happens on college campuses. And this is a reality that women have to deal with. And so for people like my opponent and his party to be so nonchalant about it, to gavel in and out of session in 14 seconds, not even discuss how a law written in 1849 may not still fit the medicine and times of the 21st century, was really a punch to the gut.
This 1849 law that you're mentioning, that hasn't been really the focus of any campaign issue for Assembly in more than 50 years.
No.
Roe v. Wade was in effect, so it's only become part of the limelight since the Dobbs decision.
Correct.
And Wisconsin is though not the only state that has invoked laws that restrict abortion. So it's basically now up to the states. So what specifically would you change from the 1849 law if you were to be elected?
Well, for one, I would repeal it. It's a badly written law to begin with. I don't believe the legislators of 1849 were time travelers or fortune tellers. So the idea that they could foresee the changes of medicine over the next 150 years is silly. I would repeal it. Quite simply, I would go a step further and work to get changes to our state constitution to make sure that liberty is protected in Wisconsin. For me, it comes down to, does the government have the right to force anyone to donate the use of their body? And the answer is no. We recognize this for dead people. We die, we don't need our eyeballs, we don't need our organs, we don't need our fluids, but we recognize the dignity of people to be able to decide what happens with their body, even when they don't need those things from a practical standpoint. Not necessarily a spiritual standpoint, but from a practical standpoint, no longer living, and they would save all sorts of lives were they to be forced to donate. But the reality is we don't do that. We recognize the power of freedom and privacy and bodily autonomy. Once that baby can survive on his or her own, then his or her interests come to fruition in my mind, and then we can, it's called a C-section. You can take them.
So viability for
Yes.
you is the point at which, so you would allow some restrictions on abortion beyond the point of viability, but up to that, would you have any restrictions?
So this is why it's important to have attorneys and people who really care about this issue legislate it. This isn't a soundbite answer. This isn't an easy, broad brush stroke approach. So the answer to your question, there's this misconception, this propaganda idea that babies are killed as they're being born in the ninth trimester. That does not happen. The danger with just a blanket, yes, we'd have restrictions, is that there are situations where doctors have to make very difficult decisions for the life of the mother, for the life of the baby, maybe for the life of the twin, if it's multiple births or babies in there. And the more red tape that government puts forth, the more the hospital lawyers have a say to protect their doctors from liability. And so what happens, my opponent's not a doctor. He's not an attorney. Most of the legislators are not doctors. They're not attorneys. They are not experts. They don't understand the unintended consequences of what they're legislating. So when you go in with an ideological perspective, you lose the nuance, which creates really scary, horrific situations. So a couple examples. Ectopic pregnancies. baby does not survive. There is no way to remove an ectopic pregnancy. That's a pregnancy outside of the fallopian tube, outside the uterus. So it could be in the fallopian tube, it could be in the liver or somewhere else in the body. But the baby will die, the mom will die. Now, because of how these laws are written throughout the country, they're so poorly written, hospitals need to wait till a woman is in crisis, or a pregnant person is in crisis with vitals that objectively establish that they are near death before somebody can step in and give life-saving care and terminate that beating heartbeat, which is obscene. It's a little bit like saying, okay, it's illegal to use a fire hose. So when the fire department goes up to the house, they have to wait until the entire house is engulfed in flames before they can put the fire out, even though in the case of an ectopic pregnancy, they know what comes of this. They know that that baby's not in the uterus, mom's gonna die if they don't do something. So making them wait just to put on the theater of the evidence of objective proof is obscene. It's creating really dystopian results. I just read a story about a baby who didn't have a skull, and because the baby still had a heartbeat, mom was forced to carry that baby to term and was not given the access to abortion care. That is devastating, to have to carry around a baby who you know is going to die a horrible, painful death immediately upon birth. The other issue, so let's back up. Anti-Roe propaganda in the 50 years of it was created by people who didn't think women should have credit cards. So that's the source here. They left a lot of things out, and 50 years of that was powerful. So, for example, the implications for criminalizing abortion affect miscarriages. Now we open the door to investigating miscarriages. Did she do it on purpose? Is somebody alleging she did it on purpose? There was a story, I want to say, out of Nebraska where law enforcement was able to get the social media under the law that suggested that perhaps somebody who had represented having miscarried after 20 weeks had in fact induced an abortion. And so that's sort of the road we're walking down, where women in their time of mourning of a lost baby, and I've been through miscarriage, it's heartbreaking, now have to prove their innocence, now have to justify what happened. So it really creates some horrific results that are not fair to anyone involved.
I'm certain that, I know because I've seen campaign literature from both sides, that this abortion law is going to be front and center also in the gubernatorial race.
Yes.
And we, those that understand the 1849 law does not have exceptions for rape or incest. Is that right?
Correct. It's cruel in that this idea that, and the narrative goes a little something like this, that it's not the baby's fault how they were conceived. It completely ignores the trauma to the mother. It ignores the trauma to the child and having to live with that. It ignores the realities of what babies born of incest have to experience with abnormalities and what comes with incestual or inbreeding, as we call it casually. And so it's really cruel. But the other thing, Jamie, I wanted to touch on is they had 50 years of money and effort to overturn Roe v. Wade. The fact that they didn't at least put that much time, energy, and money into establishing health care tells you this has very little to do with that baby. Childbirth, pregnancy is dangerous to human life. I've been through a number of pregnancies myself. I've lost a number of babies. I have 4 beautiful baby boys. But childbirth kills people. It kills the baby, it kills the mother every day. And if you look up the origin of a chainsaw, it wasn't for cutting wood. It was for cutting women's pelvises in labor when something went wrong to get the baby out. And often husbands would have to choose your wife or your baby. And it's a horrific choice that nobody should ever have to make, but that's the reality of it. And so if we're saying every baby must be born, we're gonna force that on people. Oh, but we don't care if you have access to health care. We don't care about prenatal care. We don't care if mom gives birth on the side of a building in the dirt and dies in the process. I mean, that is developing country dystopian nonsense. And, so for my opponent to turn his nose up at billions of dollars of federal funding, for example, to expand Medicaid, and then force every baby to be born, is sort of the perfect storm of cruelty in my eyes.
Well, let's focus then on the children who are born and move on from there, because I think we were off camera. You were talking, you covered the abortion law, but also you just mentioned the Medicaid expansion. So why? First of all, what's the argument? Why don't we use federal dollars in Wisconsin to help pay for health care in our state?
Yes. It sounds so petty and silly, but if you research this issue, they consistently come back to the Republicans didn't want to give Obama a win. It was coined Obamacare. Ironically, it was Romney Care in Massachusetts before that. It actually came out of a Republican think tank. So this idea that it's some, socialist agenda is just nonsense. But the Republicans of Wisconsin didn't want to give Obama a win.
So this is basically federal tax dollars that are collected from Wisconsin citizens,
Yes.
but also citizens from other states, and then redistributed to each state to then use as they see fit for how health care ought to be administered.
Correct. And we're talking billions of dollars. Even Mitch McConnell allowed that money to go back to Kentucky. But here in Wisconsin, we're not allowed to get our own tax dollars back. So, we have a mental health crisis among youth, in particular, among middle-aged men. We have people dying by suicide at alarming rates in this community. That is very shocking and very eye-opening. And the idea that we turn away that money, if you look at foreign countries and ask yourself, who turns away U.S. foreign aid? Nobody does that. Of course they take our money. So we have a situation where the U.S. government is actually trying to invest in our states, in our people, which is, what I'm hearing from both sides is that what we want to happen. We want our tax dollars invested in us, in our communities, and strengthening our families and our economy. And the Republicans in Wisconsin are refusing to let it happen. It should have cost them the election 10 plus years ago, but their talking points carried the day. Democrats weren't able to market their message effectively to really drive home how much harm this playing politics with our healthcare and our lives was doing to people. And so it just became the status quo. But even more so now, we need that money. We need that money to expand access to healthcare so we can have some competition. There are places in this district in particular where you only have one insurance provider. There is no competition. The mental health care access is abysmal in schools. You can access mental health care if you have access to private insurance to pay for it. So the schools graciously allow their facilities to be used, but don't have the support to fund the mental health care resources for their students. So, if you're a student who comes from a family that can't afford it, we're going to punish the kid because we're upset with the parents, or our ideology as it pertains to the parents means this kid gets left in the cold. That doesn't strike me as good public policy.
You started mentioning public schools, so let's flow into that issue. What would you do differently with regard to support of public schools than maybe your opponent has over his first 3 terms?
Well, for one, I would actually stick to my campaign message. One of the things that I find particularly offensive about my opponent is he sells himself as this champion of public schools come election time, but then when you go look at his voting record, he is actually a big proponent of defunding public schools in the name of siphoning money off to the private voucher schools. He enjoys the endorsement of the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and to get that endorsement, he has to sign off that, yes, I support giving these public school dollars to private schools. And what happens is public schools have to give up money for these pupils that they lose at a rate that's higher than what they receive from the state. That is wrong. And actually in this last session, my opponent actually voted to remove the income cap. So currently there's an income cap on who can get funds to go to a private voucher school.
That's how Voucher started. It was aid so that those who are poor could afford to go to private schools.
And they could have that school choice, and parents could have those options. And Shannon went a step further, towed the line for the very extreme group, WMC, who spent a big portion of that $1 million I talked about earlier to demonize me to keep him in office. So, he put in the work for them. But he voted to remove that cap. So it's not just, working class families that we're giving that money to, it's rich people. So now he wants taxpayers to pay for rich kids to go to private school at the expense of our public schools. That is just wrong on so many levels. And I have to believe a community like Hudson that voted to raise their own taxes in the name of improving our schools. We love our schools here in Hudson, and for good reason. I mean, it's a wonderful school district, and we have, actually throughout the 30th, we have really solid schools that should be supported and have great teachers and have great leadership. And to have a representative who is undercutting us at the knees is really shocking.
So would you, but there's, some people that say, well, those are my tax dollars. I should be able to choose where my kid goes to school. And if I send them to a different school, that my tax dollar should follow them. What do you say to that?
Yeah, public schools aren't for any individual family. I mean, we've sort of taken a very egocentric, selfish look at what the role of public education is. And I don't know if this is countrywide or a function of the times, but public schools, the role of public schools is to educate a populace so that we can have responsible, independent, successful adults, so that we can have a good, strong citizenship base. The role of public schools is not to serve the whims of any given parent. And, in this country, we give people the choice. If you want to homeschool your children, fine. If you want to send your kids to private school, fine. But don't expect the taxpayers who have a public interest in having an educated, free-thinking, critical-thinking public pay for it. Because what happens is it's a zero-sum game. And so if you pull from public schools, you weaken our public schools. And the voucher
So if the legislature created a separate pot of money for private school vouchers rather than taking it from the public school entity, would that be something that you would be opposed to?
It would be less offensive. There are different charter schools that play with some really interesting ideas and different approaches to learning. And I think there are some really interesting ideas and there are things to be learned. I would be very concerned about how that would be managed in a way that didn't take from public schools. But in theory, if there was a way to run parallel systems that didn't compromise our public school system, sure. I think having that competition would also, it's sort of like the Montessori school system within the public schools in River Falls. You have different teaching styles, you have different learning styles, and it's an opportunity to grow that knowledge base. But right now, the only way that we're seeing it done is at the expense of public education.
We have another public school issue that you want to champion, and that is returning driver's education to our public schools.
Yes. So it used to be that you could get driver's education through public schools. Sometime, I believe it was in the 90s, correct me if I'm wrong, that changed. So now you can still do driver's education through your public school, but you have to fund it privately. What that means is the kids with money have the opportunity to do it. The kids who don't get left in the cold. The idea is, why not have every graduating senior in Wisconsin at least have access to the opportunity to achieve a driver's license? So as a former criminal prosecutor, I can tell you driving without a license is one of the gateways into the criminal justice system. So if you're a young person and you get picked up on driving without a license because you're going to work, you're going to school, you're living your life, you are now indebted to the government hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. You now have a criminal record. And those barriers make it so much harder to be an independent, successful adult. Investing in our students in a way that gives back to the community. We have a labor shortage here in the community. We have more jobs than we can fill. Let's get those young people driver's licenses. Let's give them the ability to go to work and not have to depend on the adult in the house to get them around. Especially, we have some really great starting pay jobs for teenagers. I worked for $7.25 at Baskin Robbins at 16. So I'm like, you can make $20 an hour now. That is something. But you can't do that without a driver's license. And to make driver's licenses only accessible to those who can afford them, again, is bad public policy that hurts everybody.
We have just 1 minute here, and I have to ask because I've seen it as a definite forefront issue that neither of our gubernatorial candidates are afraid to talk about, but that is, do you support or not support decertifying the 2020 presidential election?
Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election. The fact that that is even a question that we ask and we talk about tells you how endangered our democracy or our republic is. The idea that there's this mass conspiracy that all of our clerks across the state got into a room, and it's just insanity, and it's so insulting. I mean, these clerks give so much of their time and their blood, sweat, and tears doing this really hard work, and they do such a great job. And to see them be pulled into the political crossfire and used as pawns, all of the election volunteers, all the election workers, and to see them denigrated as they have been for political points is just disgusting. It's beneath us. It's nice to see people within the Republican Party like Liz Cheney stand up for truth and say this is nonsense. But yeah, and I'm running against someone who won't give us a straight answer. So I'm hoping that you will be able to get that. But no, I think we need leadership that can say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen. It was thoroughly vetted. It was thoroughly investigated. And we need to move on. One of the things that makes Governor Evers' opponent very scary is that he would go back and look into decertifying 2020, as you said, as we're going into 2023. That would be expensive, that would be regressive, and we can't solve problems forward if we're constantly going backwards.
Well, I'm sorry I have to stop it there because there's a lot more questions I could follow up with that. But is there anything else in conclusion that you want to let our folks know about your campaign, how to get a hold of you, et cetera?
Sure. Really just encouraging folks to vote, to lean in and vote. Integrity matters. Integrity and leadership matters. So having someone who will actually do the work they represent at election time, they will do. We don't have that right now. I wouldn't be sitting here if we had that right now. People can reach me through my website, sarahforassembly.com, SARAHFOR, assembly.com. They can register to vote or get an absentee ballot at myvote.wi.gov, myvote.wi.gov, and Twitter, Facebook, social media, WIS Mama Bear. So at WIS Mama Bear, WISMAMABEAR.
All right, very good. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate having you.
Having me.
And I guess we will see what the results are in November. And I want to thank our viewers for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. This is our first of probably many interviews for this fall election, but we want you to research the candidates and follow up, ask questions, but most importantly, get out there and vote. So thank you again for watching Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.